Stop scrolling right now because the small 20-cent coin in Australia has created some of the biggest shocks in modern coin collecting history. Most people toss them aside without a second thought. But hidden among ordinary change are 20-cent coins worth hundreds, thousands, and in rare cases life-changing money. Today, we are counting down the top 5 most valuable Australian 20-cent coins ever discovered. Coins born from minting chaos, design mistakes, and moments when the Royal Australian Mint got it wrong and collectors got rich. Imagine paying for groceries with a coin that later sold for more than a car. Imagine finding a simple platypus coin in your pocket that collectors worldwide would fight to own. These coins slipped quietly into circulation unnoticed for years before experts realized their true value, from the legendary wave baseline era to ultra-rare low mintage years and jaw-dropping condition rarities. Each coin on this list has a story of luck, timing, and history colliding. Stay with me until the end, because the number 1 Australian 20-cent coin is so rare that most Australians have never seen one in real life. And once you know what to look for, you will never ignore a 20-cent coin again. Imagine holding a small silver-colored coin in your hand, a coin that looks ordinary at first glance but quietly carries the weight of a nation's story, a coin that passed through millions of pockets. In 2010, during a time when Australia was balancing tradition and modern identity, this is the Australian 20-cent coin of 2010, and today we are diving deep into its full story, from its origins to its design, from its metal to its meaning, from the hands that created it to the everyday lives touched. And by the end of this journey, you will never look at this coin the same way again, because this is not just pocket change, this is history in miniature. The Australian 20-cent coin was first introduced in 1966 when Australia shifted from pounds, shillings, and pence to decimal currency, a massive change that reshaped how Australians understood money and value. And by 2010, this coin had already been part of daily life. For more than 4 decades, the 20-cent coin was designed to be practical, durable, and instantly recognizable, with its unique 12-sided shape known as a dodecagon, a shape chosen so that it could be easily identified by touch and size, especially for vending machines and visually impaired users. And by 2010, that shape had become iconic, a symbol of consistency in Australian coinage. The 2010 20-cent coin was struck by the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra, a facility that represents precision, national pride, and continuity. Every coin produced there follows strict standards, and the 2010 issue was no exception. The coin was made from cupro-nickel, an alloy of copper and nickel chosen for its durability, resistance to corrosion, and bright silver-like appearance. The weight of the coin is 11.31 grams. The diameter measured across the flats is 28.52 millimeters, and the thickness is approximately 2.5 millimeters, making it a solid and substantial coin that feels trustworthy in the hand. The obverse of the 2010 Australian 20-cent coin features the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, designed by Ian Rank Broadley. This portrait was introduced in 1999, and by 2010 it had become the familiar face of Australian coinage. The design shows the Queen facing right, wearing the girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, a symbol of continuity, monarchy, and Australia connection to the Commonwealth. Surrounding the portrait are the inscriptions Elizabeth II, Australia, and the year 2010, all rendered in clean, precise lettering. This side of the coin connects Australia to its constitutional history and its place within a global framework of nations. The reverse of the coin is where Australian identity truly shines. It features a stylized platypus, one of the most unique animals on Earth, native to Australia and a symbol of the country's natural heritage. The platypus design was created by Stuart Devlin, a renowned Australian goldsmith and designer, whose work helped define the look of Australia. Decimal coins, the platypus appears swimming with smooth flowing lines that give a sense of movement and life, surrounded by the inscription 20 cents. The choice of the platypus was intentional, representing adaptability, uniqueness, and the blending Of old and new, just like Australia itself, by 2010, the platypus design had been in use for decades, yet it remained timeless and instantly recognizable. The year 2010 itself is important context for understanding this coin. Australia was experiencing economic stability compared to much of the world, which was still recovering from the global financial crisis. The Australian dollar was strong, consumer confidence was returning, and everyday transactions were flowing. Once again, the 20-cent coin of 2010 circulated widely in supermarkets, cafes, public transport, and vending machines, becoming a silent witness to daily Australian life. Children received them as change. After buying snacks, collectors set aside pristine examples, and millions more continued their endless journey from hand to hand. This coin did not commemorate a special event, nor was it struck as a limited edition, and that is exactly what makes it powerful. It represents normal life routine spending and the rhythm of an entire nation during that year. In terms of mintage, millions of 20-cent coins were produced in 2010, ensuring there were enough to meet circulation demand. While exact numbers matter to collectors, what truly matters historically is how widely these coins circulated. They were everywhere, and because of that, they became deeply embedded in everyday memory. The 20-cent coin was often used alongside the 50-cent coin, which is larger, and the 10-cent coin, which is smaller, creating a balanced system of value and function. The dodecagonal shape of the 20-cent coin prevented confusion with other denominations, especially important in a busy retail environment. The edges are smooth, and the shape itself acts as a tactile feature, setting it apart from round coins and reinforcing its identity. The 2010 issue followed all established standards, meaning there were no major design changes, no metal composition shifts, and no experimental features, which again highlights stability, consistency, and trust in the currency. Collectors today often overlook coins like the 2010 20-cent because they are common, but serious numismatists understand that common coins tell the most honest stories. They show how a nation functions day to day, how money flows, how design choices stand the test of time, and how millions of identical objects can still carry immense cultural value. Uncirculated examples of the 2010 20-cent coin are still available in mint sets and rolls, showing sharp details, strong luster, and flawless surfaces, while circulated examples often show scratches, rim wear, and softened details, especially on the queen portrait and the platypus body. Each mark tells a story of use, of purchase, of travel, and of exchange. Errors on this coin are rare, but collectors sometimes search for off-center strikes, cleft plankets, or die cracks, which can increase value significantly when authenticated. But for most people, the value of the 2010 Australian 20-1 coin is not monetary. It is historical, emotional, and symbolic. It represents a year in time, a system that worked, and a design that endured. It shows how Australia balances tradition and modernity, how it honors the monarchy while celebrating native wildlife, how it uses practical engineering like a 12-sided shape to solve real-world problems, and how even the smallest everyday object can carry decades of thoughtful design and national identity. So the next time you see an Australian 20-cent coin dated 2010, remember that you are not just looking at change, you are holding a piece of living history, a coin that traveled through one full year of Australian life, connecting people, businesses, and moments quietly, efficiently, and reliably. And that is why this humble coin deserves its place into our story, because history is not only written in books, it is carried in pockets, passed across counters, and preserved in metal, one coin at a time. Picture this: you are holding a small silver-colored coin in your hand, and at first glance it looks ordinary, but the moment you realize it was born in 1967, the very first year Australia introduced decimal currency, everything changes. This is not just a 20-cent coin. This is the opening chapter of modern Australian money, the sound of a nation stepping into a new era, the echo of political courage, economic reform, and cultural identity pressed into copper, nickel, and history. And today we are going to travel deep into the full story of the Australian 20-cent coin of 1967, from the tense debates inside Parliament to the pressure inside the Royal Australian Mint. From the public confusion on decimal changeover day to the lasting legacy. This coin carries more than half a century later, and by the end of this journey, you will never look at this coin the same way again, because the 1967 Australian 20-cent coin is where everything truly began. Australia in the mid-1960s was a country on the edge of transformation, still deeply tied to British traditions, still using pounds, shillings, and pence, a system that confused visitors and frustrated businesses and slowed trade, while the rest of the world was moving toward simpler decimal systems. And for decades, economists had warned that the old system was holding Australia back, yet changing a nation's currency was not just a financial decision. It was emotional, it was political, it was cultural, and many Australians feared losing a piece of their identity, but pressure kept building as global trade expanded and Australia looked toward the future, and finally the government made a bold decision. Australia would go decimal, and the target date was set for February 14, 1966. A massive national operation followed. Schools taught children how to count in dollars and cents, shops displayed dual pricing, radio and television ran constant educational campaigns, and behind the scenes the Royal Australian Mint was working at full speed, designing, striking, and producing an entirely new family of coins, and among them was a brand new denomination, the 20-cent coin, of value that had never existed before in Australian currency, chosen to bridge the gap between the 10-cent and 50-cent coins, and to feel substantial enough for daily use, yet affordable enough for everyone. And when designers sat down to imagine what this coin would represent, they knew it had to be timeless, strong, and unmistakably Australian. The result was the iconic platypus, designed by Stuart Devlin, a creature found nowhere else on Earth, an animal that symbolized uniqueness, adaptability, and quiet strength. Just like the nation itself, the platypus design was bold, clean, and modern, and it instantly set the Australian 20-cent coin apart from coins of other countries. And when the first 20-cent coins rolled off the presses, they carried the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II by Arnold Machin, reminding the world of Australia's constitutional monarchy, while the reverse proudly displayed Australian identity. And then came decimal day, the day Australians lined up at banks and shops, pockets filled with unfamiliar coins, learning their value by touch and sound. And among all the new money, the 20-cent coin quickly became a favorite, solid in the hand, distinct in size and weight, and easy to recognize. The 1967 issue continued the rollout of decimal coinage as production stabilized and demand grew, and by this point Australia had fully embraced its new monetary system. But the 1967 20-cent coin holds a special place because it represents the first full year of decimal currency in circulation, a year when Australians stopped converting prices in their heads and started thinking naturally in dollars and cents, a year when the new system proved it could work, and the mint responded by producing millions of coins to meet circulation needs. Struck in copper nickel with a milled edge, measuring just under 29 millimeters and weighing a little over 11 grams, these coins were built to last, and last they did, traveling through countless hands, supermarkets, payphones, school canteens, and pub counters, silently witnessing the everyday life of a growing nation. Over time, most of these coins became worn, smooth, their details softened by decades of use, but a small number survived in high-grade condition, preserved by collectors or forgotten in drawers. And today those well-preserved examples tell a powerful story of survival, condition, rarity, and historical importance. While the 1967 20-cent coin is not rare in absolute numbers, its value lies in its role as a foundation piece for any Australian coin collection. And for collectors, the appeal goes beyond metal and mintages. It is about owning a tangible piece of national transition, a coin that marked Australia's confident step into the modern financial world. And even errors and varieties add layers to its Story from minor die cracks to striking variations that reflect the intense production pressures of the era, every example carries a fingerprint of history. And as decades passed, the design remained largely unchanged, proving how perfectly it captured Australian identity. And today, when you find a 1967 Australian 20-cent coin, you are not just holding pocket change, you are holding the moment Australia reinvented how it counted, measured, and valued its economy. You are holding the sound of cash registers ringing in a new era, the voice of teachers explaining decimal math to classrooms full of children, the weight of political risk taken for national progress, and the quiet confidence of a country stepping forward. And this is why 1967 Australian 20-cent coin matters, why it deserves deep study, and why its story can fill hours, because it is not just about a coin, it is about a nation choosing the future and stamping that decision into metal for generations to come. Imagine holding a single Australian 20-cent coin from 1971 and realizing that this small piece of metal carries the full weight of a nation finding its modern identity, at time when Australia was stepping confidently away from the old world and shaping a future that was bold, independent, and unmistakably its own. This is not just a coin, this is a witness to change, to ambition, to quiet revolutions happening in wallets, pockets, and everyday lives across the country. And today we are going to open that story completely, from the first spark of the decimal currency idea to the hands that designed it, the machines that struck it, the people who spent it, the collectors who now hunt it, and the historical forces that gave it meaning. The Australian 20-cent coin was still young in 1971, having been introduced only 5 years earlier in 1966. When Australia made one of the most important monetary shifts in its history, abandoning pounds, shillings, and pence for a clean, logical decimal system that aligned the country with modern global economics, the 20-cent denomination was created to be practical, durable, and easy to recognize, and by 1971 it had already become a familiar companion in daily trade, used for groceries, transport, newspapers, and countless small transactions that powered everyday life. The coin itself was struck in cupro nickel, an alloy chosen for strength, longevity, and resistance too. We're reflecting a post-war world focused on durability and efficiency. It measured 28.52 millimeters in diameter and weighed 11.31 grams. Giving it a solid, reassuring feel that instantly set it apart from smaller denominations. The edge was milled not just for aesthetics but for security, helping the visually impaired identify it and preventing counterfeiting. This attention to detail showed how seriously Australia took its new currency system. The obverse of the coin featured the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, designed by Arnold Mackin. This youthful yet dignified effigy captured the monarch at a time when Australia was redefining its relationship with the British Crown. Still connected, yet increasingly independent, 1971 was a fascinating year in that relationship, as Australia asserted more control over its political and cultural direction, while still honoring its constitutional monarchy. The reverse side displayed one of the most iconic designs in Australian numismatics, the swimming platypus created by Stuart Devlin, a design so uniquely Australian that it instantly separated the nation from European traditions. The platypus is not just an animal, it is a symbol of Australia itself, strange, resilient, adaptable, and unlike anything else in the world. Devlin's design shows the platypus gliding smoothly through water, calm, confident, and perfectly at home in its environment. This image spoke volumes about how Australia saw itself in the early 70s, a country comfortable in its uniqueness and ready to move forward on its own terms. 1971 itself was a year of transformation. Globally and locally, Australia was experiencing social change, economic shifts, and a growing sense of national confidence. The Vietnam War was still casting a shadow, youth culture was rising, environmental awareness was growing, and the Australian identity was becoming louder, clearer, and prouder. The 20-cent coin from this year passed through the hands of factory workers, office clerks, students, soldiers, and families. It jingled in pockets during protests, sat in cash registers, at corner shops and traveled across states in caravans and buses. It was silent, but it was present everywhere. Minting for the 1971 20-cent coin was carried out at the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra, a facility that symbolized national self-sufficiency. Before the mint, Australia relied heavily on overseas production, but by the time this coin was struck, the country had full control over its currency production. The presses operated with precision, striking millions of coins to meet demand. The mintage for 1971 was high, reflecting the growing population and expanding economy. These coins were never meant to be rare. They were meant to work, and that is exactly what they did. Yet decades later, condition has become everything. While circulated examples are common, high-grade uncirculated coins from this year are increasingly sought after by collectors who understand that survival without wear is the true measure of rarity. The metal surfaces of a well-preserved 1971 coin still shine with original luster. The platypus details remain sharp, and the Queen's portrait retains its fine lines untouched by decades of trade errors and varieties. Also add intrigue. While 1971 is not famous for major errors, collectors still search for off-center strikes, clipped plankets, and die cracks, knowing that even common years can produce extraordinary survivors. The value of the coin today depends heavily on condition and provenance, but its real worth lies in its story. This coin represents a mature moment in Australian decimal history, no longer new but not yet old, a coin that lived through a pivotal era and quietly carried the weight of a changing nation. For collectors, historians, and storytellers, the 1971 Australian 20-cent coin is a perfect gateway into understanding modern Australia. It connects art, politics, economics, and everyday life into a single tangible object. And as you hold it, you are not just holding metal, you are holding the sound of a cash register in a suburban shop, the movement of a hand across a counter, the rhythm of a country moving forward. And this is why a simple 20-cent coin from 1971 deserves a deep to our conversation, because every scratch tells a story, every detail has meaning, and every moment it spent in circulation helped shape the Australia we know today. Imagine holding a single Australian 20-cent coin from 1980 in your hand and realizing that this small piece of metal is a doorway into the economic tension, political transition, cultural identity, and everyday life of an entire nation at a turning point in modern history. Because the 1980 Australian 20-cent coin is not just spare change, it is a silent witness to a decade when Australia was redefining itself on the world stage, balancing tradition and modernity, facing inflation, social reform, technological growth, and a shifting national identity. And this coin moved through millions of hands in pockets, purses, cash registers, buses, pubs, corner shops, and supermarkets, while the country debated its future and built the foundations of the Australia we know today. And to understand the 1980 20-cent coin, you must go back to the story of Australian decimal currency itself, introduced in 1966 when Australia broke from pounds, shillings, and pence and embraced a cleaner modern decimal system symbolizing independence, confidence, and global alignment. And by 1980, decimal currency was no longer new, but it had become deeply woven into daily life, with the 20-cent coin occupying a unique role as a practical workhorse used constantly, yet rarely examined. And that makes the 1980 issue especially fascinating, because it reflects a mature currency in a nation dealing with real-world pressures, including rising costs of living, wage debates, energy concerns, and political shifts. And the 1980 20-cent coin was struck during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, whose portrait appears on the obverse, designed by Arnold Machin, a dignified, timeless effigy that had already become familiar to Australians, representing stability, continuity, and constitutional monarchy at a time when Republican conversations were beginning to quietly surface. And on the reverse, the iconic platypus, designed by Stuart Devlin, stands as one of the most distinctive and beloved designs in world Coinage chosen not by accident, but as a symbol of Australian uniqueness, resilience, and adaptation, an animal that defies simple classification, just as Australia itself often does. And by 1980, this platypus had already become a national icon recognized instantly by citizens and collectors alike, and the physical characteristics of the coin tell their own story, composed of copper-nickel, giving it durability and a silver-gray appearance. The coin was designed to withstand heavy circulation because it was never meant to be rare, it was meant to be used, and that is precisely why the 1980 issue matters, because it circulated widely during a year when Australia faced inflation pressures. Following the economic turbulence of the late 1970s, when global oil shocks had raised prices and tested households and governments alike, and every time this coin changed hands, it participated in the everyday economy, paying for bread, milk, newspapers, public transport, phone calls, and small essentials, anchoring abstract economic policy into real human experience. And the year 1980 itself was a moment of transition, with Malcolm Fraser serving as Prime Minister, leading a Liberal National coalition government focused on economic restraint, national security, and maintaining traditional alliances, while social change continued beneath the surface. And the 20-cent coin of that year quietly supported commerce during debates about wages, unemployment, and national direction, and millions of these coins were minted at the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra, a facility that itself symbolized national capability, pride, and technical achievement, producing currency for a growing population and a growing economy. And although exact mintages place the 1980 20-cent coin firmly in the category of common circulation issues, that very commonness is its power, because it allows collectors, historians, and storytellers to trace where patterns, circulation habits, and the lived reality, money in motion. And many surviving examples show scratches, rim, nicks, and surface, where each mark a record of countless transactions, moments, decisions, and interactions between strangers. And that is where the 1980 coin becomes deeply human, because it was present during a year when Australians watched television news on growing colour broadcasts, listened to radios in cars, factories, and kitchens, and followed international events, including Cold War tensions, sporting achievements, and cultural shifts, while this coin quietly facilitated daily routines. And from a numismatic perspective, the 1980 20-cent coin is studied for strike quality, plankett consistency, and die characteristics, with collectors examining rim strength, detail on the platypus, for lines, and clarity of the queen portrait. And while no major error varieties dominate this issue, minor die cracks, off-center strikes, and double rim effects exist, adding intrigue for specialists. And these subtle imperfections remind us that even in mass production, human systems are never perfectly uniform, and in that sense the coin mirrors society itself. And for collectors today, the 1980 20-cent coin represents accessibility, nostalgia, and historical continuity, because it is often one of the first Australian coins found in childhood collections, inherited jars, or bulk lots, making it a gateway into deeper numismatic interest. And its value is not measured primarily in rarity or price, but in connection and context. And when you place the 1980 coin alongside earlier and later issues, you can trace the evolution of minting techniques, metal quality, and circulation patterns, seeing how Australia moved steadily toward a more modern economy and globalized future. And beyond, collecting the coin serves as a teaching tool, illustrating how money reflects political authority, artistic choice, economic necessity, and cultural identity all at once. And this is why a 2-hour exploration of the 1980 Australian 20-1 coin is not excessive, because within it lies discussions of decimalization, monarchy, national symbols, mint technology, inflation, public trust in currency, and the psychology of everyday spending. And when you truly slow down and study this coin, you realize it is not silent at all. It speaks volumes about who Australians were in 1980, what they valued, how they lived, and how a nation expressed itself through something as simple and powerful as a small round piece of metal passed from hand to hand shaping lives without ever asking for attention, and that is the story of the 1980 Australian 20-cent coin, a common coin with an uncommon depth, waiting to be understood, appreciated, and remembered. Imagine holding a small, ordinary silver-colored coin in your hand, a coin you have probably seen 1,000 times passed across counters, dropped into pockets, ignored in change trays. Yet this exact 20-cent coin, struck in the year 2000, quietly carries the weight of Australian history, modern transition, national identity, minting technology, and collector psychology all at once, because the Australia 20-cent coin of the year 2000 is not just a piece of loose change, it is a time capsule from the moment Australia stepped fully into a new millennium, a year charged with symbolism, hope, uncertainty, and global attention. And this coin became one of the most widely handled physical objects to mark that transition. The obverse carries the familiar portrait of Queen Elizabeth II by Ian Rank, broadly a portrait that itself represented modernization, sharper detail, realism, and authority, compared to earlier effigies, signaling that even tradition was evolving. While the reverse shows Stuart Devlin's iconic platypus, a creature found nowhere else on Earth, chosen deliberately to represent Australia's uniqueness, resilience, and quiet strength. And in the year 2000, this design, already more than 3 decades old, had become one of the most recognizable circulating coin designs in the Southern Hemisphere, and yet most people never stopped to ask why the platypus was chosen. Why the metal feels the way it does, why the milling on the edge matters, why the year 2000 matters more than any other date on this denomination, and how millions of these coins became silent witnesses to everyday life at the turn of the century, from supermarket queues to vending machines, school canteens, bus fares, parking meters, and piggy banks. This coin moved through every layer of society, rich, poor, young, old, urban, rural, and indigenous communities alike, making it one of the most democratic artifacts of modern Australia, struck by the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra using cupro nickel alloy, chosen for durability, corrosion resistance, and a distinctive ring when dropped. The coin measures a precise diameter and weight, engineered for machine readability, reflecting how currency by the year 2000 had to function not only in human hands but in automated systems. And while millions were produced to meet circulation demand, the year itself created a psychological dividing line: collectors, casual hoarders, and everyday people alike set aside millennium-dated coins, believing consciously or subconsciously that someday they would matter, and that belief alone changed survival rates, condition availability, and long-term collectability, even though most examples remain common today. Pristine uncirculated pieces, proof strikes, and mint sets from the year 2000 already tell a different story, revealing sharper strikes, frosted devices, mirror fields, and careful handling that contrast sharply with the battered circulated examples most people remember. And beyond numbers and metal, the year 2000 20-cent coin sits in a broader narrative of Australia at the dawn of the 21st century, a nation balancing British heritage with an increasingly independent identity, debates over republicanism, reconciliation, technological growth, and global engagement, all happening while this coin quietly passed from hand to hand, and the platypus itself, a monotreme that defies classification, mirrors Australia's own complex identity, neither fully old world nor entirely new world, practical yet strange, familiar yet unique. And as the years passed, this specific date became a marker for collectors, building date runs, teaching new generations about decimal currency, introduced only decades earlier in 1966, and showing how design continuity can coexist with historical change. And when you examine the edge, the wear patterns, the strike quality, and even the toning on a well-preserved 2000 20-cent coin, you are reading a biography of motion, friction, and time. Each scratch tells a story of commerce, each smooth surface speaks of pockets, drawers, or collections where it rested untouched. And when you realize that nearly every Australian alive at the time likely handled this coin at least once, you begin to understand its cultural reach far beyond its face value. And this is why the Australia 20-cent coin of the year 2000 deserves attention, not because it is rare in the traditional sense, but because it is historically dense, it represents the crossing of a millennium, the endurance of a design, the evolution of minting standards, and the shared experience of an entire nation stepping into an uncertain future with a small silver-colored coin in their palm. And as you watch this story unfold, remember that history is not only written in grand monuments and famous documents, sometimes it lives in the quiet weight of a 20-cent coin dated to 2000, waiting for someone to finally look closely enough to hear what it has been saying all along. And when you continue to peel back the layers of the Australia 20-cent coin, dated 2000, you begin to see how deeply it is tied to systems far larger than money itself, because currency is trust made physical, and in the year 2000, trust in institutions, technology, and globalization was being tested and reshaped. And this coin moved through that exact moment without fanfare, yet with total acceptance. Every shop, every machine, every hand agreed on its value, instantly proving how powerful a simple standardized object can be. And the Royal Australian Mint understood this responsibility when striking the coin, ensuring consistency, weight tolerance, and electromagnetic signature so that banks, vending machines, and transit systems would all recognize it flawlessly. And that technical precision reflects an era where cash still ruled daily life just before digital payments began their slow takeover, and this makes the 2000 dated 20-cent coin one of the last generation of coins to dominate everyday transactions before the world changed forever. And if you look at production context, you find that the mint was operating at full modern capacity, using advanced presses, quality control, lasers, and alloy testing that earlier decades never had. Meaning that strikes from this year are often sharper, more uniform, and more technically perfect than older examples. Yet ironically, this very perfection makes standout errors even more fascinating. Off-center strikes, clipped plankets, weak strikes, or die cracks from this year immediately catch collector attention because they break the expectation of modern consistency and tell us that even in a highly controlled system, human and mechanical flaws still slip through, and those error coins transform an otherwise common date into a unique artifact that can never be replicated. And beyond errors, the 2020 cent coin also lives within the story of sets, annual mint sets, proof sets, baby sets, and presentation packs that captured the optimism of the millennium. Market due not just to collectors but to families, tourists, and first-time buyers who wanted a physical reminder of the year the calendar rolled over and the world held its breath. And these sets preserved coins in perfect condition, freezing them in time, while circulated examples lived hard lives. And that split destiny is part of what makes this coin endlessly discussable, because one date produced millions of completely different stories depending on where each coin ended up. And if you zoom out further, you see how this coin fits into the evolution of Australian decimal currency itself, introduced only a generation earlier, replacing pounds, shillings, and pence. And by the year 2000, Australians had fully internalized decimal thinking, making the 20-cent coin a mental anchor for value, pricing, and budgeting. And that psychological role matters because coins shape how people understand money, and the 20-cent piece often represented a small but meaningful unit, enough for a phone call, a snack, a bus fare contribution, making it a coin associated with everyday decisions rather than luxury or savings. And that everyday relevance gives it emotional weight. And when collectors revisit childhood memories, they often remember the feel of this exact coin, the platypus design, the ridged edge, the cold metal in their palm. And those memories drive collecting just as much as rarity charts and price guides. And from a design standpoint, Stuart Devlin's platypus proved timeless, surviving unchanged through decades of political, economic, and cultural change. And the year 2000 strike shows how a strong design can outlive trends, fashions, and even monarchs, becoming almost invisible through familiarity, yet iconic through longevity. And this paradox is central to why the coin deserves a long, deep exploration, because it teaches us that importance is not always loud. Sometimes it is repetitive, consistent, and quietly everywhere. And as years turn into decades, The 2000 date gains historical distance, becoming a marker for a generation much like 1966 or 1988 before it, and future collectors will increasingly see it not as modern pocket change, but as a relic from the early digital age when cash still connected people physically and socially, and as fewer of these coins circulate due to hoarding, loss, melting, and attrition, the surviving population will naturally shift toward collections drawers and archives, changing availability and perception, and that slow transition from circulation to collection is happening right now and noticed by most. And when you realize that you are not just looking at a coin, you are watching history move from present to past in real time. And that is why the Australia 20-cent coin of the year 2000 is worthy of a full to our story, because it allows us to talk about technology, identity, economics, memory, design. Imagine holding a small silver-colored coin in your hand and realizing that it has traveled through millions of pockets across Australia, that it has witnessed the quiet daily rhythm of a nation at work and at rest, and that it carries a story far bigger than its size, because the Australian 20-cent coin dated 2001 is not just spare change, it is a living artifact of modern Australian identity. And this is where the story truly begins, with the weight of history, culture, design, economics, and everyday life all pressed into a single piece of metal that most people never stop to look at. Yet today we are going to slow down and uncover everything, because the 2001 Australian 20-cent coin represents the bridge between the 20th century and a new millennium, a moment when Australia stood confident in its decimal currency system while embracing technological change, global trade, and a strong sense of national symbolism. And to understand this coin, you must go back to 1966, when Australia abandoned pounds, shillings, and pence and embraced decimal currency, a bold decision that reshaped commerce, education, and daily life. And at the heart of that new system stood the 20-1 denomination, carefully chosen to be practical, durable, and symbolic, featuring the platypus, an animal found nowhere else on Earth, chosen to represent the uniqueness, adaptability, and quiet strength of Australia itself. And by the time the calendar turned to 2001, the platypus had already become one of the most recognizable coin designs in the Southern Hemisphere, created by renowned artist Stuart Devlin, whose clean, modern design captured motion, texture, and national pride without excess. And the 2001 issue carried this legacy forward unchanged, because consistency was power. The public trusted the design, collectors respected it, and the Royal Australian Mint understood that stability in coinage reflects stability in a nation. And the coin itself was struck in copper nickel, an alloy chosen for durability, resistance to corrosion, and a bright finish that could survive decades of circulation. And even now, many examples from 2001 remain sharp, with visible details on the platypus for webbed feet and streamlined body, while the obverse bears the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, reminding us that Australia, though independent, retains its constitutional monarchy, a connection to history, tradition, and global continuity. And during 2001, Australia was experiencing economic confidence, strong exports, population growth, and expanding international presence. And coins like this were produced in massive quantities, not for collectors, but for everyday Australians buying groceries, paying fares, and living their lives, which means that this coin quietly participated in history without ceremony, without headlines, yet everywhere. And that is what makes it powerful, because millions were struck and released into circulation, meaning scarcity was never the point, usefulness was. And yet over time, even common coins become historical markers, frozen in a specific year, a specific moment when the world was changing rapidly, with the rise of digital technology, mobile phones, and online commerce all beginning to challenge the dominance of physical money. Yet the 20-cent coin endured, because it was trusted, reliable, and tangible. And in 2001, cash still ruled everyday transactions, and this coin moved constantly from hand to hand, from city to outback, from coast to desert, linking Australians across vast distances and social backgrounds. And when you examine its edge, with its distinct milling, you see a feature designed for function and security, preventing counterfeiting, and aiding the visually impaired, reflecting thoughtful engineering rather than decoration. And when you weigh it in your hand, at just over 11 grams, you feel the balance that mint engineers perfected decades earlier and maintained through 2001, ensuring vending machines, transport systems, and cash registers function seamlessly. And this coin also tells a story of restraint because there were no commemorative changes, no flashy redesigns, no special markings, just continuity, which in itself speaks volumes because at the dawn of a new millennium, Australia did not feel the need to reinvent its everyday symbols. It trusted them, and that confidence is embedded in this coin. And for collectors today, the 2001 Australian 20-cent coin offers something different from rare errors or low mintage pieces. It offers context. It offers a snapshot of normal life at a turning point in global history. A reminder that while dramatic events dominate headlines, real history is lived quietly through ordinary objects, and this coin is one of those objects. And as years pass, its meaning only deepens, because future generations will look at it as a physical connection to a time before cashless payments dominated, before coins began disappearing from pockets and purses. And in that sense, the 2001 20-cent coin becomes more than currency. It becomes a time capsule, and that is why it deserves attention, study, and respect, because when you truly understand this coin, you understand not just Australian money, but Australian life at the start of the 21st century. Steady, confident, practical, and quietly proud, and this is only the beginning of what this small piece of metal has to teach us. Imagine holding a single Australian 20-cent coin dated 2009 in your hand and realizing that this small circular piece of metal is a time capsule carrying stories of a nation, a changing economy, global uncertainty, royal symbolism, indigenous art, maritime heritage, and everyday life, all pressed into one object that most people barely notice when it passes through their fingers. This is not just pocket change. This coin is a witness to history, survivor of circulation, a product of design, politics, technology, and culture. And today we are going to peel back every layer of its story, from the origins of the Australian decimal system to the world events shaping 2009. From the Royal Australian Mint to the hands of collectors, from supermarket tills to forgotten jars, because the 2009 Australian 20-cent coin represents far more than its face value. It represents continuity, stability, and identity in a year when the world felt uncertain. Australian 20-cent denomination itself was born in 1966 when Australia abandoned pounds, shillings, and pence in favor of a modern decimal currency, a move that symbolized independence, confidence, and a forward-looking nation. And from its very first issue, the 20-cent coin was set apart by its distinctive dodecagonal shape, 11-sided edges that made it instantly recognizable, even without looking, a functional choice designed to help the visually impaired, and a bold statement that Australian money would be practical, innovative, and uniquely its own. By 2009, that shape had become iconic, instantly tied to everyday Australian life, and the coin issued that year carried the same trusted design that generations had grown up with. On the obverse was the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II by Ian Rank, broadly a dignified, mature depiction adopted in 1998. Showing the monarch as a steady, enduring presence. This portrait on the 2009 issue reflects a time when Australia remained firmly a constitutional monarchy, yet increasingly confident in its own national voice. The legend surrounding the portrait speaks quietly of authority, continuity, and tradition, values that felt especially important in 2009 as the world was still reeling from the global financial crisis. Banks were collapsing, economies were contracting, and uncertainty dominated headlines. Yet Australia weathered the storm better than many nations, and its currency, including the humble 20-cent coin, became a symbol of that resilience, moving daily through the economy unchanged, dependable, familiar. On the reverse of the coin is one of the most powerful and culturally significant designs in Australian numismatics, the platypus sculpted by Stuart Devlin, first introduced in 1966. This creature, strange, unique, And unmistakably Australian perfectly represents the spirit of the nation, a mammal that lays eggs, swims like a fish, and defies easy classification, just as Australia itself has often defied expectations. In the 2009 issue, the platypus appears poised and alert, surrounded by rippling water lines that suggest motion, balance, and connection to the land and waterways. This is not decorative art, this is national storytelling through metal and form. The composition remains clean, confident, and timeless, reinforcing why the design endured for decades without the need for replacement. The coin itself is struck in cupro-nickel, an alloy chosen for durability, resistance to corrosion, and suitability for mass circulation, weighing 11.3 grams and measuring 28.5 millimeters across from flat edge to flat edge. It is built to last, and many 2009 coins remain in circulation today, bearing the marks of use, scratches, dulling, and wear that tell silent stories of every transaction they have been part of, from coffee purchases to bus fares, from vending machines to charity tins. In 2009, the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra produced millions of 20-cent coins, not as commemoratives, but as working currency intended to keep the nation moving. And yet it is precisely this everyday role that makes the 2009 issue fascinating, because it reflects what Australia needed at that moment: reliable money, trusted systems, and continuity amid global disruption. While other nations experimented with design changes or faced currency instability, Australia continued issuing coins that looked and felt the same, reinforcing public confidence and economic calm. Collectors often overlook high mintage circulation coins, but history teaches us that these are the true mirrors of daily life, and the 2009 20-cent coin is a perfect example. Not rare, not flashy, but deeply honest. Its value to collectors today is generally modest, unless found in exceptional uncirculated condition or part of mint sets. Yet its historical value is undeniable. It marks a year when Australia stood steady while the world shook, when a familiar coin in the hand offered reassurance that some things still worked, still endured, still held value beyond fear and speculation. This coin also represents the end of an era in subtle ways, as cash usage would begin to decline in the following decade, with digital payments rising rapidly, making physical coins like this one increasingly symbolic of a tactile economic experience that future generations may only know through collections and stories. So when you look at a 2009 Australian 20-cent coin, you are not just looking at metal, you are looking at design choices made in the 1960s, artistic continuity preserved through decades, royal imagery reflecting constitutional reality, a native animal chosen to express national identity, and a year frozen in time when quiet strength mattered more than novelty. This is the kind of coin that does not shout but endures, and its story deserves to be told slowly, deeply, and with respect, because sometimes the most powerful history is carried not by rare gold or dramatic errors, but by the coins that passed unnoticed through millions of hands, doing their job day after day, holding together the rhythm of a nation.